Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Today, I'll be briefing you all about India, which is traveling tall, I guess, at a speed above 4 meters per second. So the overview is in reference with SIPSI Guide D because that's widely used in India, and this is the right platform to talk about it. To begin with, there are many tall buildings coming up in India because it's a developing country. Of course, many of which have a sustainable vertical transportation system, but many of them are disasters. I can say that because by virtue of being a consultant, we keep reviewing buildings around. So, speaking about history of tall buildings in India, we have witnessed a tall building around 120 meters in 2002, which had a speed of about 4 meters per second. But before that, we had a building, Usha Kiran, which was 25-story, which had a speed of lifts with speed 2.5 meters per second, which was tallest in South Asia. But until 2002, we didn't have any real tall building. So talking about general approach in elevating in India is as we are developing, we are in a learning phase, and we keep debating between what the precedences around the world are and what the real practical issues and requirements in India are. So we are in a learning phase. There aren't many Indian codes in India which talk about tall building designing. Hence, we refer to many international codes, SIPSI Guide D being one of them. Moving on, India has a very unique lifestyle and cultural difference, which do drive the vertical transportation designing, and few of the differences are highlighted in the subsequent slides. Another important aim has to be of constructing a habitable building post occupancy, because just like the one shown in the uppermost tower, we do have tall structures in India since 1200 AD, but of course they are not habitable, they are just structures. So difference between habitable building and structure needs to be attained. As most of us know, the many key design considerations for any tall buildings. So I'll just go through it quickly. The type and class of the building, location of the building and nearby places which affect the vertical transportation system, building's population distribution, other services requirements, emergency evacuation, economic impact, project planning, and selection of the right type of equipment. Particularly here, I would like to talk about buildings population distribution in the subsequent slides, because that affects the vertical transportation system majorly. As I said, I will be reviewing the SIPSI Guide D from an Indian context. To start with residential buildings, the SIPSI Guide D clause 3.15.9 talks about is it okay?
Seems to get a bit of interference off.
Or it's the battery, maybe.
No, battery's full.
Thank you. So this clause talks about a commonly used design period for a residential building is afternoon, 5-minute two-way traffic condition. But most of the Indian residential buildings observe very light traffic in the afternoon. Hence, we usually design the residential buildings for the morning peak, 5-minute peak, where in that period we see children going to the school, office goers exiting the building, and there are maids, servants, drivers, cleaners, which of course, are many in India. They travel up the building. So it's a very complex morning peak, which is for which we design the vertical transportation system for residential buildings. Another important aspect is still in many residential tall buildings, there is cooking gas cylinder and garbage disposal, which happens by service lifts. So this aspect needs to be considered, and designers need to understand this. Moving on, the occupation pattern. The first table 3.12 is from SIPSI Guide, of course, and the below table is what is usually referred to for any Indian building. So, as you can see, the family culture in India is not yet non-nuclear, and there are many even the resident numbers are higher, as you can see in the table. The service staff count is another important parameter which needs to be considered while designing, because we still get our daily milk, bread, groceries, newspaper delivered at our doorstep. So imagine a 50-story building where the milkman is delivering milk at every doorstep, which is usually in the morning. So it's a very complex morning peak, as I said earlier. There are, in many tall and high-end buildings, there are still 24/7 resident servants which stay with the occupants. Hence, the resident service staff count also needs to be considered. Moving on, another clause from SIPSI Guide D, which I would like to talk about, is the stair factor. So, in many Indian tall buildings, the entrance lobbies are double or even triple height lobbies. Hence, I guess in calculations, the stair factor really doesn't come into picture. Hence, the stair factor needs to be in correlation with the height of the lobby. Another lifestyle change which needs to be accounted for is the self-driven versus chauffeur-driven car ratio, because in many buildings the absence of concierge desk is there. So the drivers, cleaners in the morning go up the building to collect the keys and then come down at the entrance lobbies to clean their cars or to keep the car ready. Hence, there are multiple journeys which the drivers and cleaners make in the morning peak. So this factor needs to be considered. And in many high-end buildings, the self-driven versus chauffeur-driven ratio could be as high as 30:70. So this parameter needs to be considered. Moving on to office buildings, the areas per person can vary from 4 square meter to, for small offices, to 25 square meter per person if it's a single tenant building, single tenant office. Usual working hours are from 10 to 6. We don't prefer to work early morning. So the working hours are different there. This needs to be considered. And the recommended quality and quantity of services are just tabled just in the table, as we refer from the National Building Code of India, which are pretty similar to SIPSI Guide D. But National Building Code is silent on average waiting time, because people still don't look at this parameter, which is of course important if we talk about tall buildings. Another important aspect is lunch peak, which many of the buildings don't even consider. So there are many high-end buildings, even modern buildings, which have lunch peaks of around 15 to 20 minutes. So people need to, so designers need to maybe understand that. Moving on to hotel buildings, of course the international norm of 1 lift per 100 keys does work, but additional count for service lifts needs to be considered, because there are few things, I mean the fresh made masala chai or fresh ginger tea, which cannot be made at room, and we need service, room service for that. Another aspect is many of the banquet halls are provided, are serviced using escalators, but the Indian attire is pretty flowy and for the functions and weddings, so this factor needs to be considered, where even lifts need to be provided. For mixed-use buildings, of course, bifurcation of different constituents is what will determine the success of the building, and service staff movement in tall buildings is very crucial. Moving on to hospital buildings, as this IPSI guiding clause says, there are 2 to 3 story low-rise buildings. Of course, there are high-rise buildings as well, but because due to space constraint and because hospital sector is booming up in India, we have pretty tall hospital buildings in India. And the difference here is the visitor number, which is very huge in India, because we tend to visit the patient or the newborn baby in huge numbers. So this factor needs to be considered, and separate visitor elevators need to be provided. So to sum up, every tall building is unique. Of course, the Indian tall buildings are way much unique. So this uniqueness needs to be respected, and accordingly, the vertical transportation system needs to be designed. Cultural differences and its impact on vertical transportation system needs to be understood by the designers, and VT system must complement the occupants' requirements and not the other way around. Thank you.